frightened to fight back while power tightens its grip and the future quietly disappears. This isn't about tanks. It isn't even about Ukraine anymore. It's about whether Russia can survive as a functioning state once the war finally breaks it. When the guns fall silent and defeat can no longer be concealed, what happens behind the Kremlin walls? Does the country erupt? Or does it decay from within, quiet, compliant, hollowed out? Here's the unsettling truth few want to voice. Russia may not collapse in fire and fury. It may collapse in numb silence. No uprising, no revolution, just a nation too exhausted, too old, too afraid to resist, as power tightens its grip and the future quietly slips away.
If the Russians lose the war in Ukraine, what does that mean for national stability within Russia proper? Are we looking at an immediate disintegration or what? Great question. Now, there are a lot of examples in Russian history of where the center has broken, and a loss in Ukraine doesn't necessarily mean that the Kremlin loses power, but there's really two big pillars of power in Russia. One is the military, and the other one is the internal security services. And the important thing to remember about Russia is, unlike a country like Iran, where the country is actually half non-Persian, and so the military is primarily responsible for occupying itself in order to keep all the minorities under control. In Russia, that's not the case. In Russia, even if the Russian census data is completely fabricated, which it probably is, we probably have at least 70% of the Russian population actually being ethnic Russian. So among those populations, with the possibility of St. Petersburg, where there might be an economic push for independence, most of the Russians are going to stay put. They've been conditioned. They've eaten nothing but propaganda for quite some time. And most importantly, most of the young people are gone. Not only has the birth rate in Russia been dropping since before World War II, it plummeted under Khrushchev, fell even more under Gorbachev, and particularly nosedived in the 1990s. You add in 1 million casualties in the Ukraine war and another 1 million people under age 30 fleeing, and there really isn't that youth generation that generally generates revolutionary activity. And the Russian population will be concerned about losing what little they have left. So the chances of them being really rebellious are pretty low. The other 30%, of course, is a different question.
What he's really describing is a harsh reality. Defeat does not automatically bring down the rulers in Moscow. Power in Russia is built on force and fear, not popular consent. With a largely ethnically Russian population, there is no deep internal fracture pulling the country apart. And after decades of falling birth rates, catastrophic wartime losses, and an entire generation either dead or gone, the social group that historically fuels revolutions has largely vanished. What remains is a society more afraid of losing what little it still has and daring to rise up. Peter Zeihan's conclusion is chilling. Russia is not designed to explode in rebellion. It is designed to endure decay through fear, exhaustion, and silence. But this is where theory collides with reality on the battlefield. Because while the population may remain frozen, Russia's military machine is no longer holding together. And the moment the illusion of protection shatters, everything Zeihan warned about accelerates at once. What follows is not speculation or slow decline. This is collapse unfolding in real time. This is the point at which Putin begins losing not just territory, but control, credibility, and the very tools that keep his system alive. Russia's borders no longer function as borders. They are wounds. Regions once described as secure are now exposed, open, and bleeding. Nowhere is this more humiliating for the Kremlin than along Ukraine's frontier. Belgrade, long portrayed as shielded by Russia's most elite defenses, has become proof that Moscow can no longer protect its own backyard. What happened was almost unthinkable. 2 of Russia's crown jewel air defense systems were destroyed on the same day. Not damaged, not suppressed, erased. And yet, as shocking as Belgrade is, Crimea is where the real nightmare begins. For years, Crimea was sold to Russians as untouchable, a symbol of strength, a fortress under Moscow's iron umbrella. That fantasy is now burning in plain sight. The peninsula has become an active war zone where Ukraine is no longer testing defenses, but dismantling them. One of Russia's most prized air defense systems was destroyed. Fighter aircraft prepared to launch hypersonic strikes were hit on the ground. This was not random. It was deliberate, calculated, and devastating. Ukraine's intention is now unmistakable. Crimea is being prepared for retaking. In just days, Russia absorbed a double shock that rattled the Kremlin to its core. 3S, 400 air defense systems eliminated. 1 MiG, 31 fighter crippled. Hundreds of millions of dollars wiped out. But more damaging than the cost was a loss of faith in Russia's own defenses. The illusion finally collapsed on the night of December 18th, when flames rose from Belbek Air Base. Not just fire, but the funeral pyre of Russia's myth of invincibility. Ukrainian security sources report that the operation targeted Russia's eyes and fists on the peninsula. Among the first hits were 2 Nebo SVU radar systems. Massive VHF radar complexes worth around $100 million each, designed to detect stealth aircraft. Russia proudly calls them its ghost hunters. When Ukrainian drones located and destroyed these electronic giants, Russian control of the skies over Crimea effectively went blind. But blinding the enemy wasn't enough. During the kinetic phase of the operation, the 92N6 fire control radar, the brain of the S-400 system, was also destroyed. Without it, the S-400 becomes useless. No tracking, no targeting, no interception. Just an expensive scatter of vehicles. That single radar alone carries an export value of roughly $60 million. This is what air defense collapse looks like. Then came the strike that sealed the message. A MiG-31, one of the few aircraft capable of launching hypersonic Kinzhal missiles, was hit while parked on the runway, fully loaded for combat. The aircraft itself is worth over $50 million, but its strategic value is far greater. With it gone, Russia lost its ability to immediately retaliate using one of its most feared weapons. Under those conditions, a counterstrike would have been suicidal. Continued drone attacks were likely. Losses would have multiplied. So Russia hesitated. And hesitation in war is lethal by conservative estimates. The Crimea operation alone caused more than $200 million in damage. But Ukraine wasn't finished. Further north, inside Russian territory, the scale of the operation became unmistakable. Near the village of Ryabki in the Belgorod region, the Russian 568 Anti-Aircraft Missile Regiment was struck. 2 S-400 launchers defending the border were destroyed, along with their missiles. Video evidence shows massive secondary explosions as the systems detonated their own ammunition. This wasn't luck. It was systematic hunting. From Crimea to Belgorod, across hundreds of kilometers, Ukraine demonstrated it can locate and eliminate Russia's most advanced, most expensive, and most trusted air defense systems at will. Russian claims of air superiority near the border have been exposed for what they truly are, a fairy tale. Even layered defenses failed. A Panzer S-2 system worth roughly $19 million was unable to protect Belbek Air Base and was itself destroyed. The doctrine collapsed. The shield shattered. And when the sky is no longer safe, the sea becomes a death trap. On the same day as the Crimea strikes, Ukrainian drones hit Russia's energy lifeline. Near Rostov-on-Don, the tanker Valery Gorchakov was struck close to the Novoshakhtinsk oil terminal. The vessel began taking on water and started sinking. Photos taken afterward show the stern nearly submerged by morning. No visible rescue effort. Just barriers placed around a wounded ship. The tanker was carrying fuel, the bloodstream of Russia's war effort. The implications are enormous. Inside Russian territorial waters, in areas claimed to be safest, tankers are being hit. Air defense systems meant to protect them are exploded with their own ammunition. This is not an isolated failure. It is systemic chaos. And chaos breeds fear. Pilots at Belbek watched their defenses fail. Sailors near Rostov learned that even port offered no safety. Fear leads to hesitation. Hesitation fractures discipline. Armies don't collapse when they run out of weapons. They collapse when they no longer feel safe using them. Now Russia faces an impossible choice. Pull advanced air defenses away from the front to protect cities and ports, or leave Moscow, Rostov, and logistics hubs exposed while defending the front. Every successful Ukrainian strike shortens the blanket. Cover one side, expose the other. Desperate for answers, Moscow rushed forward its next card, the S-500 Prometheus. Russia announced its first S-500 regiment has entered combat duty, boasting extreme range and altitude capabilities. But here's the problem. We've already seen what happens to the S-400. These systems are vulnerable even to drones. The idea that Crimea can suddenly become impenetrable again is fantasy. Russia is also trying offense as defense. Long-range bombers fly over Black Sea, escorted by fighters, daring Ukraine to respond. But Ukraine now fields F-16s. Combined with French Mirage jets, the balance is shifting. Cruise missiles lose effectiveness when detected early, and Ukrainian air defenses have proven lethal. With conventional options shrinking, Putin is once again dragging nuclear weapons into the conversation. Hypersonic deployments, escalating threats. Fear is a tool, but the contrast is stark. While Russia clings to intimidation and escalation, Ukraine is investing in precision, logistics, and resilience. Heavy cargo drones now sustain frontline units over long distances. Modular, reparable systems designed not for spectacle, but endurance. And that is the clearest picture of this war. On one side, a regime running out of shields and leaning on threats. On the other, a military adapting, innovating, and steadily closing in on Crimea. This wasn't just the largest strike of the war. It was the moment Putin began losing everything that once made Russia feel untouchable.